In the heart of a rugged, hilly region, there was a small village that time seemed to have forgotten. This place wasn't marked on most maps, and even if it were, few would bother visiting. Life here was hard, brutally so. The soil was dry and cracked, refusing to yield crops no matter how much effort the farmers put into tilling it. Rain came rarely, and when it did, it was either too little or too late. Hunger hung over the village like a dark cloud, never lifting, always looming. Among those who bore the weight of this harsh existence was a young boy named Arjun. He was only 10 years old, but his eyes carried the weariness of someone much older. His thin frame told its own story, one of skipped meals, empty stomachs, and nights spent staring at the ceiling, trying not to think about food. His clothes were patched together with care but still barely held up against the elements. Yet despite all this, Arjun had a spark within him, a quiet determination that refused to let despair completely take hold. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and red, Arjun sat outside his tiny mud brick home. His family gathered around a pot of watery lentils, their only meal for the day. It wasn't enough to fill anyone's belly, but they shared what little they had. As he ate, Arjun's mind wandered. He thought about the stories his grandmother used to tell, tales of lush forests where fruits grew abundantly, rivers flowed freely, and animals roamed without fear. Those stories felt like fairy tales now, far removed from the reality of their barren land, but something stirred inside him. What if those stories weren't entirely made up? What if beyond the hills surrounding the village there really was a forest filled with food? The idea took root in his mind, growing stronger with each passing second. By the time dinner ended, Arjun had made up his mind. He couldn't sit idle while hunger gnawed at his insides. If there was even the smallest chance of finding something edible out there, he had to try. Under the cover of darkness, Arjun slipped out of the house. His heart pounded as he walked toward the edge of the village, clutching a small sack he hoped to fill with whatever treasures he might find. The air was cool, and the stars twinkled faintly above him, offering a sliver of comfort. But as he ventured deeper into the wilderness, the comforting sounds of the village faded away, replaced by eerie silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and distant calls of nocturnal creatures. The path ahead was treacherous. Thorny bushes scratched at his arms, and uneven ground threatened to trip him at every step. Still, Arjun pressed on, driven by desperation. Hours passed, and exhaustion began to creep in. His legs felt heavy and his vision blurred. Just as doubt started to creep into his mind, he stumbled upon a clearing, and there, nestled among the trees, stood a small, weathered hut. It looked abandoned at first glance, its wooden walls warped with age and its roof sagging under years of neglect. But then, a faint glow emanated from one of the windows, revealing signs of life. Curiosity mingled with caution as Arjun approached the door. Before he could knock, it creaked open, and an elderly woman appeared. She was dressed in dark clothing, her face lined with wrinkles etched by decades of hardship. Her piercing gaze locked onto Arjun, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "Who are you?" she asked finally, her voice low and steady. Arjun hesitated, unsure of how to answer. I'm hungry," he admitted softly, his voice trembling. "I came looking for food." The woman studied him for a long moment before stepping aside. "Come in," she said simply. Inside, the hut was modest but surprisingly warm. A fire crackled in the corner, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The smell of herbs wafted through the air, mingling with the aroma of simmering broth. Without asking further questions, the woman handed Arjun a bowl of the steaming liquid. He devoured it greedily, savoring every drop. For the first time in days, his stomach felt full. As he ate, the woman introduced herself. Her name was Kalyani, though everyone in the village called her the Black Widow. Rumors swirled about her, that she was cursed, that she practiced dark magic, that misfortune followed anyone who crossed her path. But none of these tales mattered to Arjun. All he saw was kindness in her eyes, kindness that had saved him when he needed it most. By the time the fire burned low and the night grew quiet, Arjun realized he'd found more than just food, he'd found hope. And in that moment, he silently vowed to repay Kalyani someday, no matter how long it took. Little did he know their lives were destined to intertwine in ways neither of them could have imagined. This expanded version brings depth to the setting, characters and emotions while keeping the tone natural and engaging. Let me know if you'd like me to continue expanding other parts. The warmth of the broth spread through Arjun's body, chasing away the chill that had settled deep in his bones. As he sat cross-legged on the earthen floor of Kalyani's hut, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: comfort. It wasn't just the food or the fire crackling softly in the corner. It was the quiet presence of the woman who had taken him in without hesitation. Her dark eyes watched him intently, not with judgment but with an understanding that seemed to go beyond words. Once Arjun finished eating, Kalyani placed the empty bowl aside and leaned back against the wooden wall of the hut. For a while, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, like two strangers finding solace in each other's company after years of loneliness. Finally, Kalyani broke the quiet. "Why were you out there alone?" she asked, her voice calm, but firm. Arjun hesitated, unsure how much to share. He wasn't used to talking about his struggles. Back home, everyone knew what life was like. They didn't need explanations. But this woman was different. She wasn't from the village, and yet she'd opened her door to him without question. Slowly, he began to speak. "My family. We don't have enough food," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought maybe I could find something in the forest. Berries, roots, anything." Kalyani nodded slowly, as if she already understood. "Hunger brings people to desperate places," she said, almost to herself. Then, looking at him again, she added, "You're brave for coming this far. Most wouldn't dare." Her words surprised Arjun. No one had ever called him brave before. In fact, most people dismissed him because of his age, assuming he was too young to make a difference. But Kalyani saw something in him, something worth acknowledging. As the night wore on, Kalyani shared bits of her own story. She told him about her husband, who had passed away many years ago, leaving her alone. Without family or friends nearby, she retreated to the forest, building this small hut and learning to live off the land. Over time, the villagers began to avoid her, spreading rumors about her being cursed or dangerous. Some even claimed she was a witch. "But I'm none of those things," she said with a faint smile. "I'm just a woman trying to survive, same as anyone else." Arjun listened intently, hanging onto every word. He realized that despite their differences, they weren't so unlike each other. Both had faced hardship, both had been misunderstood, and both were doing whatever they could to keep going. Before long, exhaustion overtook Arjun and his eyelids grew heavy. Sensing this, Kalyani gestured toward a pile of blankets in the corner. "Rest now," she said gently. "Tomorrow will be brighter." Grateful for her kindness, Arjun lay down and drifted off to sleep. That night, for the first time in weeks, his dreams weren't haunted by hunger or fear. Instead, they were filled with hope, a feeling he hadn't known existed until now. When morning came, sunlight streamed through the cracks in the hut's walls, casting golden patterns on the floor. Arjun woke up slowly, stretching his limbs, and feeling stronger than he had in days. Kalyani was already awake, tending to the fire and preparing another simple meal. She handed him a piece of flatbread smeared with honey, which he ate eagerly. "You should head back soon," she said as he finished eating. "Your family will worry." Arjun nodded, knowing she was right. But as he stood up to leave, he felt a pang of sadness. He didn't want to go, not yet. There was something comforting about being here, away from the harshness of the village. And then there was Kalyani herself. Despite everything she'd been through, she still chose to help others. That kind of selflessness left a lasting impression on him. "I'll come back," he promised suddenly, surprising even himself. "I'll bring you something next time." Firewood, maybe, or water. Anything you need. Kalyani smiled faintly, though there was a hint of skepticism in her expression. Don't trouble yourself, she said. I've lived this way for a long time. I don't expect anything in return. But Arjun shook his head stubbornly. No, I mean it. You helped me when no one else would. I won't forget that. For a moment, Kalyani looked at him closely, as if searching for sincerity in his eyes. Whatever she found must have reassured her because she nodded slowly. If you say so, then I believe you, she replied. Just take care of yourself, boy. This world is tough enough without adding more burdens. With that, Arjun stepped, outside squinting against the bright sunlight. He turned back once to wave goodbye, and Kalyani stood in the doorway watching him disappear into the trees. Neither of them knew it at the time, but this encounter marked the beginning of a bond that would change both their lives forever. As Arjun made his way back to the village, his mind raced with thoughts of Kalyani. Who was she really? Why did the villagers treat her so cruelly? And why did she choose to live such a solitary life? These questions lingered in his mind, unresolved but intriguing. One thing was certain, though. He owed her a debt he couldn't repay with mere words. By the time he reached home, his family greeted him with relief and scoldings mixed together. They hugged him tightly, grateful that he was safe. When they asked where he'd been, Arjun simply said he'd wandered too far and fallen asleep under a tree. He didn't mention Kalyani, not yet. Somehow he felt protective of her, as if sharing her secret might put her in danger. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Arjun replayed the events of the past day in his mind. Meeting Kalyani had been unexpected, but it gave him a new perspective. Life wasn't just about surviving. It was also about helping others, even when it seemed impossible. And so, a seed was planted in his heart. A seed of gratitude, determination, and purpose. Someday, somehow, he would find a way to repay the woman who had saved him. Until then, he carried her memory with him, a reminder that even in the darkest times, kindness could light the way. The days that followed Arjun's first meeting with Kalyani became a turning point in his young life. True to his promise, he returned to her hut as often as he could. At first, it was just once or twice a week, whenever he managed to sneak away from his chores without raising suspicion. But over time, those visits grew more frequent, until they became a routine, a cherished part of his otherwise monotonous existence. Each trip to the forest felt like stepping into another world. The dense trees shielded him from the harsh realities of the village, their branches whispering secrets only he and Kalyani seemed to understand. When he arrived at her hut, she would always be busy, tending to her small garden, gathering herbs, or cooking something fragrant over the fire. Yet no matter what she was doing, she paused to greet him with a nod and a faint smile that made him feel welcome. At first, Arjun struggled to find ways to help her. He wasn't strong enough to carry heavy logs for firewood, nor skilled enough to identify all the plants she used in her remedies. But Kalyani didn't expect perfection. She appreciated effort. So, he started small. He fetched water from the nearby stream, weeded her garden, and even tried his hand at grinding spices using an old stone mortar and pestle. Each task taught him something new, not just about survival, but about patience, resilience, and the value of hard work. Kalyani, in turn, began teaching him things he'd never learned in the village. She showed him how to recognize edible fruits and leaves, explaining which ones were safe to eat and which could make him sick. She pointed out medicinal herbs hidden among the undergrowth, sharing stories of how they had healed wounds, cured fevers, and eased pain. Knowledge is power, she told him one day while showing him a cluster of wild mint. If you know how to use what nature gives you, you'll never truly go hungry. But it wasn't just practical skills that Kalyani imparted. She also opened up about her own life, revealing pieces of her past bit by bit. She spoke of her husband, a kind man who had loved the forest as much as she did. Together, they had dreamed of building a life surrounded by nature, far from the judgmental eyes of society. But fate had other plans. Her husband fell ill suddenly, and despite her best efforts to save him with herbal remedies, he passed away, leaving her alone. "I chose to stay here because this place reminds me of him," she confessed one evening, as they sat by the fire. "Every tree, every bird call, it's like he's still with me." Arjun listened quietly, his heart aching for her loss. Though he couldn't fully understand the depth of her grief, he admired her strength. Despite everything she'd endured, she hadn't given up. Instead, she found purpose in helping others, even if it meant living in solitude. Their conversations weren't always serious, though. Sometimes they laughed together, over Arjun's clumsy attempts at gardening or Kalyani's playful teasing when he mispronounced the names of certain plants. Those moments of lightheartedness brought them closer, bridging the gap between their vastly different lives. As weeks turned into months, Arjun noticed subtle changes in himself. His body grew stronger from the physical labor, and his mind sharpened from the knowledge Kalyani shared. More importantly, he began to see the world through new eyes. Where others saw barren land and despair, he now saw potential. For growth, for healing, for hope. One afternoon, as they worked side by side in the garden, Kalyani handed him a handful of seeds. "Plant these near your home," she instructed. "They're resilient like you. With care, they'll grow even in poor soil." Arjun accepted the seeds gratefully, tucking them carefully into his pocket. He knew they were more than just plants. They were a symbol of trust, of faith in his ability to create change. When he returned to the village later that day, he wasted no time planting the seeds exactly where Kalyani had suggested. Every morning he watered them diligently, watching eagerly for signs of sprouting. It took longer than he expected, but eventually, tiny green shoots pushed through the earth, defying the odds. Seeing them thrive filled him with pride and renewed determination. Back in the village, life continued much as it always had. Hunger remained a constant companion for many families, and tensions ran high as resources dwindled further. Yet Arjun carried himself differently now. There was a quiet confidence in his step, a spark of optimism in his gaze. People noticed, though few understood why. Some whispered that he'd been bewitched by the Black Widow during his trips to the forest. Others dismissed him as foolish for wasting time on someone so isolated. But Arjun didn't care what anyone thought. To him, Kalyani wasn't a witch or an outcast. She was a mentor, a friend, and a lifeline. She had given him not only food and shelter, but also tools to survive and thrive. And deep down, he knew he owed her more than he could ever repay. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor, Arjun voiced a thought that had been brewing in his mind for some time. "I want to leave the village someday," he said hesitantly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Kalyani looked up from the fire, her expression unreadable. "Leave? Why?" "I want to learn more," he explained earnestly. "Not just about plants or herbs, but about everything. I want to go to school, study science, figure out how to help people like us, people who struggle every single day." For a moment, Kalyani said nothing. Then slowly she nodded. "It's a good dream," she said finally. "But it won't be easy. You'll face challenges, setbacks, maybe even failures. Are you ready for that?" "Yes," Arjun replied, without hesitation. "I have to try. If I don't, who will?" Kalyani studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes filled with a mixture of pride and concern. Finally, she reached out and placed a weathered hand on his shoulder. "Then I'll do whatever I can to help you get there," she said firmly. "You've got grit, boy. Don't lose it." Those words stayed with Arjun long after he left the hut that night. They echoed in his mind as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the village, a future where he could make a real difference. And at the center of that vision stood Kalyani, the woman who had believed in him when no one else did. She had shown him that kindness wasn't weakness, that resilience wasn't born overnight, and that even in the darkest times, hope could bloom like a seed in poor soil. Little did either of them know, their bond was destined to endure far beyond these quiet moments in the forest. Someday it would lead them both to places neither could have imagined. But for now they cherished the present, the shared laughter, the lessons learned, and the unspoken promise that tied them together. Because sometimes all it takes is one act of kindness to change a life. And sometimes that act sets off a chain reaction rippling outward until it touches countless others. Arjun's resolve to leave the village and pursue an education burned brighter with each passing day. It wasn't just a vague idea anymore. It had become a mission, a purpose that consumed his thoughts. Kalyani's encouragement had ignited something within him, a fire that refused to be extinguished no matter how daunting the obstacles seemed. But leaving the only home he'd ever known wouldn't be easy. The path ahead was riddled with challenges, starting right in his own backyard, the skeptical eyes of the villagers. When word spread that Arjun wanted to go to school, reactions were mixed. Some shook their heads in disbelief, muttering about wasted effort. "What good will books do when we can barely put food on the table?" one neighbor scoffed. Others were openly critical, accusing him of abandoning his family during tough times. Even his parents, though supportive at heart, worried about how they would manage without him. "You're our son," his mother said one evening as they sat around the dim glow of a kerosene lamp. Her voice trembled with emotion. "We need you here. Who will help us in the fields? Who will look after your younger siblings?" Arjun lowered his gaze, guilt twisting in his chest. He hated the thought of causing his family pain, but deep down, he knew this was something he had to do, not just for himself, but for all of them. If he succeeded, if he learned enough to make a difference, he could come back and lift them out of poverty. That belief kept him grounded, even when doubt crept in. "I'm not leaving forever," he assured his mother, meeting her eyes with unwavering determination. "I'll work hard, save money, and send some back whenever I can. And when I finish, I'll return and help everyone." His father, sitting silently until now, finally spoke. "It's a big dream, son," he said gruffly, rubbing his calloused hands together. "But dreams don't feed mouths or pay debts. How will you afford it?" That question lingered heavily in the air. Education came with costs, fees, uniforms, books, and Arjun's family couldn't spare a single rupee. For a moment, despair threatened to creep in. Then he remembered Kalyani. She had already done so much for him, surely she'd have advice. The next morning, armed with nothing but hope, Arjun made his way to her hut. When he arrived, Kalyani was tending to her garden, humming softly under her breath. She looked up as he approached, her sharp eyes catching the tension in his posture. "What troubles you today?" she asked, setting aside her tools. Arjun hesitated before blurting out everything: the villagers' skepticism, his parents' fears, and most importantly, the financial hurdle standing between him and his dreams. To his surprise, Kalyani didn't dismiss his concerns or tell him to give up. Instead, she listened intently, nodding occasionally as if piecing together a puzzle. When he finished, she stood up and walked over to a wooden chest tucked away in the corner of the hut. Opening it carefully, she pulled out a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth. Inside lay a collection of coins and crumpled bills, not much by any standard, but clearly saved over years of living frugally. "Take this," she said, pressing the bundle into his hands. Arjun stared at her, stunned. "No, I can't." "You can and you will," she interrupted firmly. "This isn't charity, boy. It's an investment. You've got potential, and I believe in you. Use it wisely." Tears welled up in Arjun's eyes as he clutched the money tightly. He wanted to protest, to insist that she needed it more than he did, but the look in her eyes stopped him. This was her way of saying goodbye, for now, and entrusting him with a piece of herself. With Kalyani's support bolstering his courage, Arjun began tackling the practicalities of his journey. First, he sought guidance from the few educated individuals in the village, a retired teacher, and a traveling merchant who occasionally visited with news from the outside world. They advised him on scholarships, government programs, and schools that might accept students from impoverished backgrounds. Every lead required persistence. Arjun wrote letters, filled out forms, and traveled long distances to attend interviews, often walking barefoot along dusty roads under the scorching sun. There were rejections, plenty of them, each one stinging like a slap. But instead of letting failure crush him, he used it as fuel to push harder. One breakthrough came unexpectedly. A local NGO focused on rural development heard about his efforts and offered partial funding for his education. Though it wasn't enough to cover all expenses, combined with Kalyani's savings and odd jobs he took on during breaks, it became manageable. Slowly, painstakingly, the pieces fell into place. On the day he finally left the village, emotions ran high. His family gathered around him, hugging him tightly and whispering blessings. His younger siblings clung to his legs, begging him not to go. Even the villagers who had once doubted him showed up to see him off, their expressions softened by a mix of curiosity and reluctant admiration. Kalyani stood apart from the crowd, leaning on her walking stick as she watched him prepare to board the bus that would take him to the city. Her face remained composed, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of sadness. As Arjun approached her, she reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Remember where you came from," she said quietly. "And never forget why you're doing this." Arjun nodded, blinking back tears. "I won't," he promised. "And I'll come back for you. I swear." With that, he climbed onto the bus, clutching a worn backpack containing all his worldly possessions. As the vehicle rattled down the dirt road, he turned to look out the window one last time. Kalyani stood there, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the forest, waving slowly until she disappeared from view. The city was overwhelming at first, a chaotic maze of honking horns, towering buildings, and bustling crowds. Everything moved faster here, and everyone seemed to have somewhere important to be. Arjun felt like an outsider, a speck of dust swept into a whirlwind he didn't fully understand. Yet amidst the chaos, he found moments of clarity. The library became his sanctuary, a quiet refuge where he could lose himself in books and imagine a better future. Teachers noticed his dedication and encouraged him to aim higher, pushing him to apply for competitive programs. Through sheer grit and determination, Arjun excelled academically. He earned scholarships, internships, and recognition for his innovative ideas. His focus shifted toward agriculture, driven by memories of barren fields and hungry faces back home. He studied crop rotation techniques, water conservation methods, and sustainable farming practices, determined to find solutions that could transform lives. Years passed in a blur of lectures, experiments, and late-night study sessions. Through it all, Arjun carried Kalyani's words close to his heart. Her lessons about resilience, kindness, and gratitude guided him through every challenge. And, though he missed her dearly, he reminded himself daily of the promise he'd made, to return and repay her in ways that truly mattered. Because sometimes dreams aren't just personal aspirations. They're promises to those who believed in us when we couldn't believe in ourselves. For Arjun, that promise was tied to Kalyani, the woman who had given him not just money, but hope. Little did he know, fate had plans to test that bond in ways neither of them could foresee. But for now he focused on the present, pouring every ounce of energy into building a future worthy of her sacrifice. The city was a world away from the quiet, barren village Arjun had grown up in. It buzzed with energy, its streets alive with people rushing to their destinations, vendors shouting to sell their wares, and cars honking impatiently as they navigated traffic jams. For someone like Arjun, who had spent most of his life surrounded by open fields and silence, it felt overwhelming at first. But he quickly learned to adapt. Every challenge became an opportunity, a chance to grow stronger, smarter, and more determined. At university, Arjun stood out, not because he was extraordinary, but because he worked harder than anyone else. While other students complained about assignments or skipped classes, Arjun sat in the front row soaking up every word his professors said. He stayed late in the library, poring over textbooks until the librarian gently reminded him it was closing time. On weekends, when others went to parties or slept in, He worked part-time jobs, cleaning offices, delivering packages, anything that could earn him a little extra money to send back home. But it wasn't just hard work that set him apart. Arjun brought something unique to the table: perspective. Growing up in poverty had taught him to see problems differently. When his classmates debated theoretical solutions in class, Arjun thought about practical applications. How could these ideas help farmers struggling with drought? What could be done to improve soil fertility without expensive chemicals? His questions often caught his professors off guard, sparking lively discussions that challenged everyone's thinking. One professor, Dr. Rao, took particular notice of Arjun. A kind-hearted man with decades of experience in agricultural science, Dr. Rao saw potential in the young student. After one particularly engaging lecture, he pulled Arjun aside. "You're not just here to pass exams, are you?" Dr. Rao asked, his tone warm but probing. Arjun hesitated before answering honestly. "No, sir. I want to make a difference. Back home, we have no water, no good seeds, no way to fight diseases and crops. I want to learn how to fix those things so I can help my family, and maybe others too." Dr. Rao smiled faintly, nodding approvingly. "That's rare these days. Most students are here for degrees, not purpose. You remind me of myself when I started." From that day on, Dr. Rao became a mentor to Arjun, guiding him through complex topics and introducing him to groundbreaking research projects. Under his supervision, Arjun began working on innovative techniques to address common farming issues. One project focused on developing low-cost irrigation systems using recycled materials. Another explored natural pest control methods, reducing reliance on harmful pesticides. Each success fueled his confidence, proving that even someone from a forgotten village could contribute meaningfully to the world. Despite his growing achievements, life in the city wasn't easy. Money remained tight, forcing Arjun to stretch every rupee as far as it would go. There were nights when he skipped dinner to save cash, telling himself it didn't matter because he'd eaten enough during lunch. Clothes wore thin, shoes developed, holes in his backpack barely held together with duct tape. Yet none of this deterred him. He reminded himself constantly of Kalyani's sacrifice, the bundle of coins she'd given him, the faith she'd placed in him. Giving up wasn't an option. Loneliness was another hurdle. The city was crowded, yet Arjun often felt isolated. Most of his peers came from privileged backgrounds, talking about vacations abroad or expensive gadgets they wanted to buy. Conversations about luxury cars or trendy cafes left him feeling out of place. He missed the simplicity of village life, the warmth of shared meals, and the comfort of knowing everyone around him understood struggle. Still, he found solace in small moments. A phone call home, hearing his mother's voice asking if he was eating well, made him smile despite the distance. Letters from his siblings written awkwardly in pencil brought tears to his eyes. And then there were memories of Kalyani, her steady presence lingering in his mind like a comforting shadow. Whenever doubt crept in, he imagined her voice urging him to keep going. Over time, Arjun's efforts began paying off. His projects gained recognition, earning him awards and scholarships that eased some of the financial strain. Word spread about his dedication, and soon he was invited to speak at conferences, sharing insights into sustainable farming practices. People listened intently, impressed not only by his knowledge but also by his passion. Yet amid all the accolades, one question haunted him. What had become of Kalyani? Whenever he visited the village during holidays, he made it a point to search for her. But each time, disappointment greeted him. Villagers claimed they hadn't seen her in months or years. Some speculated she might have moved deeper into the forest. Others whispered grimly that she'd passed away. No one seemed certain, and no one cared enough to investigate further. Arjun refused to believe the worst. Deep down, he clung to the hope that she was still alive, waiting patiently in her hut, tending to her garden as she always had. He promised himself that once he graduated and secured a stable job, he'd dedicate time to finding her. Until then, he carried her memory with him, letting it fuel his determination. Years flew by in a blur of lectures, experiments, and late-night study sessions. Before he knew it, graduation day arrived. Standing in a crisp suit borrowed from a friend, Arjun walked across the stage to receive his diploma. The applause echoed in his ears, but his thoughts drifted elsewhere, to the dusty roads of his village, to the faces of his family, and to Kalyani, whose belief in him had paved this path. As he posed for photographs with Dr. Rao and fellow graduates, Arjun allowed himself a moment of pride. He had achieved what once seemed impossible. Against all odds, he had risen above poverty, ignorance, and prejudice to carve out a better future, not just for himself, but for those counting on him. But as the celebrations wound down and reality set in, Arjun realized his journey was far from over. Graduation marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Now, armed with education and experience, he was ready to return to his roots, to give back to the community that shaped him, and to honor the woman who saved him. Little did he know, fate had plans to reunite him with Kalyani sooner than expected. And when that moment came, it would test everything he thought he knew about gratitude, resilience, and the power of human connection. While Arjun was busy chasing his dreams in the city, life in the village and deep within the forest had taken a harsh turn for Kalyani. Time, as it often does, had not been kind to her. Years of solitude and hard work had worn her down, leaving her frail and weakened. Her once sturdy hands now trembled when she tried to hold a hoe or gather firewood. The vibrant garden she'd nurtured with such care had begun to wither alongside her fading strength. Weeds crept in where flowers used to bloom, and the herbs she relied on grew sparse and untended. The villagers, who had always kept their distance, seemed to have forgotten about her altogether. To them, Kalyani was nothing more than a shadowy figure from old stories, a cautionary tale whispered to children to keep them away from the forest. No one ventured near her hut anymore, save for the occasional traveler seeking shelter during storms. Even then, they left quickly, uneasy under the weight of superstition and fear. Kalyani didn't mind being alone. She'd grown accustomed to it over the years. But loneliness isn't something you get used to. It's something you endure. And as her body failed her, endurance became harder. Simple tasks like fetching water from the stream or cooking a meal felt monumental. On some days, she barely had the energy to leave her bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling as memories played out in her mind like scenes from an old film. Among those memories, one face stood out vividly. Young Arjun, wide-eyed and hungry, standing at her doorstep all those years ago. She remembered how determined he'd been, how eager to learn and help despite his age. He'd reminded her of herself when she was younger, resilient, hopeful, unwilling to give up even when the odds were stacked against her. Watching him grow stronger and more confident under her guidance had reignited a sense of purpose she thought she'd lost forever. But now, as she lay weak and aching in her small hut, Kalyani wondered if Arjun ever thought about her anymore. Had he forgotten the woman who had fed him when he was starving? Did he remember the lessons she'd taught him, the names of plants, the importance of resilience, the value of kindness? Or had the bright lights of the city blinded him to the humble roots that shaped him? These thoughts haunted her, not because she expected anything in return, but because she missed him. In the quiet, moments between chores and rest, she found herself imagining what he might be doing. Was he studying late into the night, surrounded by books? Had he made friends who appreciated his brilliance? Did he still carry the same spark of determination she'd seen in his eyes all those years ago? One particularly cold evening, as rain pelted the roof and wind howled through the trees, Kalyani felt a pang of longing so sharp it brought tears to her eyes. She wrapped herself in a thin blanket, shivering despite the fire crackling feebly in the corner. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel vulnerable, to admit that she needed someone, anyone, to share this burden with her. "I hope you're happy, boy," she murmured aloud, her voice trembling. "I hope you've found your place in the world." Her words hung in the air, swallowed by the sound of raindrops hitting the earth outside. If only she knew how close her wish was to coming true. Meanwhile, back in the city, Arjun was preparing for the next phase of his life. After graduating, he landed a job with a non-profit organization focused on rural development. His role involved traveling to remote areas, assessing agricultural challenges, and implementing sustainable solutions. It was demanding work, requiring long hours and constant travel, but it filled him with purpose. Each success story, a farmer doubling his yield, a community gaining access to clean water, felt like a step closer to repaying Kalyani. Yet no matter how fulfilling his work was, Arjun couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. Every time he visited the village, he searched for news of Kalyani, but the answers remained the same. No one knew where she was, or whether she was even alive. The uncertainty gnawed at him, casting a shadow over his achievements. Then, one day, while conducting fieldwork in a neighboring district, Arjun heard a rumor that changed everything. A group of farmers mentioned a reclusive woman living deep in the forest, known for her knowledge of medicinal herbs. They described her vaguely, but the details matched Kalyani perfectly. Arjun's heart raced as he pieced together the clues. Could it really be her? After all these years, could fate finally be giving him a chance to repay her? Without hesitation, he decided to investigate. Using childhood memories as his guide, he set out on foot, retracing the path he'd walked countless times as a boy. The journey was arduous, the terrain rough, the weather unpredictable, but none of that mattered. With each step, his excitement grew. What if she was still there, waiting for him? Finally, after hours of trekking, he reached the clearing where her hut once stood. His breath caught in his throat as he saw it, still intact, though weathered and battered by time. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a sign of life within. Trembling with anticipation, Arjun approached the door and knocked softly. When the door creaked open, Kalyani appeared, leaning heavily on a walking stick. Her hair was streaked with gray, her face lined with wrinkles, but her dark eyes still held the same warmth he remembered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, recognition dawned in her expression, followed by disbelief. And finally, joy. "Arjun?" she whispered, her voice hoarse but unmistakable. Tears welled up in his eyes as he nodded. "It's me, Didi. I came back for you." Kalyani stared at him, shaking her head as if unable to believe what she was seeing. "You're real," she murmured, reaching out to touch his arm as though confirming his presence. "Yes, I'm real," he said, kneeling beside her. "And I'm here to take care of you. You saved my life once. Now let me save yours, for..." The first time in years, Kalyani smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that lit up her entire face. In that moment, she realized that the boy she'd helped all those years ago had grown into a man worthy of pride. As they sat together inside the familiar hut catching up on lost time, Arjun vowed silently to never leave her behind again. This reunion wasn't just a meeting of two souls. It was the beginning of redemption, a testament to the power of gratitude and the unbreakable bonds forged through kindness. Little did they know, their story was far from over. Together, they would face new challenges, celebrate new victories, and prove that even in the darkest times, love and loyalty can light the way forward.